Serious campers of Reddit, what is the scariest / creepiest / most disturbing thing that has happened to you in the woods? When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night my friend and I would walk through the woods. We called this the ritual. This particular night we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. We had flashlights. We liked to try and navigate through the woods with them turned off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously we hit the flashlights and spun around. Didn't see anything. So we kept walking and we hear it again. This time we stop and look around a bit before we decided to head back to our campsite. Then we see what's whispering. It's a lady crawling on the ground whispering just random words. She was wearing dark clothes and was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and declares that she is looking for her campsite. We ended up walking her back to the campground and tried helping her find her group. Turns out she was just super drunk / high and got lost trying to find a bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods she would have been lost all night. It was pretty creepy. Went camping in Jenny Springs in Florida about 10 years ago, and sometime at night I heard that sound you hear in movies / TV of a huge tree falling. Didn't think anything of it. About 10 minutes later I started hearing lots of people talking outside my tent. So I got out and discovered the tree fell on someone's tent kind of close by and killed them. A helicopter had to come and airlift them out. My ex and I shared a birthday and would camp at Jenny Springs every year to celebrate. One night we heard this blood-curdling scream followed by growling. We were convinced there was a mountain lion fight going on right outside the tent. After a few minutes of this, I got up the courage to stand up in the tent and look through the mesh ceiling. Turns out it was a stray house cat engaged in a standoff with an armadillo. Safari guide here. Woke up one morning with something very warm, rather soft and comfy on my back. Realized my back was against the canvas of the tent. Realized it was an animal. It was a really cold winter night. Temperatures dropped close to zero here in the low vault. WTF. As I moved a bit, I heard the voice from my buddy from his tent. He spoke a bit hushed and with a definite tremble in his voice. "The Africa bug, are you awake?" Stupid me replied with a strong voice, "Yes." The animal next to me got up and, luckily, ran away. It was a big male lion. My cat does the same. When it's cold outside, she likes to snuggle up behind my back. The lion was just a big kitty who wanted to cuddle. I've posted this before. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my top and next to all of my gear as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I notice that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum. Methodica. You are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. Camping alone in a bit of secluded bushland. Lots of sticks and leaflitter so can hear critters and people moving easily. Hearing a plopping noise during the night, but no other noises. To wake up to see a decapitated kangaroo's head next to the tent. That obviously wasn't there when I put the tent up. No explanation. Got the F out of there. Went camping with my friends back in high school. We hiked way out into the woods/mountains and collapsed exhausted into our tents. Middle of the night. I hear something outside my tent. Then another something. And another. All around the tent. It sounded so much to me like something stalking up to our tent. Surrounding it. I gathered my courage and looked out, shining my flashlight in at the pitch black darkness. All I could see in the dark was shining eyes looking back at me. Not little eyes or eyes close to the ground, but almost man height and large. Turned out it was a herd of deer. It was 2 AM pitch dark. Low fire. We heard rustling in the woods. Flashlights pan out. All of a sudden a mole comes running towards us and into the fire. We could hear it sizzling while we all were screaming. The next day the charred body was buried with an proper funeral. I had a nasty thunderstorm that spawned a tornado roar over me one night. The tornado cut a path a couple of kilometers away. At one point the lightning was almost continuous. No choice but ride it out. My siblings and I went camping once and had a very similar experience. Incredibly powerful storm comes through and the lightning is just slamming the lake and crawling endlessly through the clouds while an endless roar goes on and on. The winds and roar got so intense that we considered abandoning the tent for the car. Considering the tent was lifting off the ground, we end up running to the car and climb in and proceed to watch our tent collapse and be blown into a nearby tree. The car was shaking like a Methodica, so we decided to get out of there and drive about 20 minutes to my grandpa's house to spend the night. The next day we went back and part of the campground was closed because a small tornado had apparently gone through the campground the night before and trees were blocking some of the roads. Whether it was during or after our adventure we have no idea, but from what we could tell it was pretty close to where we were. We cleaned up our campsite and left. I have never witnessed a storm so powerful and frightening before. I also never found my sleeping bag. My parents' story, not mine. They were on a canoe trip way up in nowhere, Saskatchewan, far from any semblance of civilization. One morning, they hear a rustling outside their tent. Still half asleep, my dad sits up and tries to figure out what is going on. The noise is loud and very close. Before he can collect himself enough to go investigate, his whole side of the tent collapses in on top of him. The weight lifted quickly. Now entirely awake, my parents scrambled to open the tent flap and figure out what was going on. About 10 feet away was a spooked black bear, staring confused and concerned at the tent. After being yelled at a bit, it ran off. We figure it had been foraging in the bushes right behind the tent and lost its balance. So my dad can truthfully say he has been sat on by a bear. I love how the bear was just sitting there confused and concerned like, oh golly me, I hope I didn't hurt anything. Oh they are mad. I will leave now friends, so sorry, goodbye. We like to hike 3 to 5 miles down a trailhead in deep Georgia. One night the temperature dropped into the low 20s, which is really rare for mid-fall. We got a solid fire going, and the heat mixed with a full belly put us all to sleep. I woke up to my buddy tapping my foot with a stick. I looked up at him, and he nodded toward the fire. There were 2 wild boar kicking up dirt around the dying fire. We didn't have any sort of weaponry, except a hand axe that was out of our reach. My friend and I laid there completely silent watching these 2 for about an hour till the fire died completely down, and they moved on. If you don't know, wild boars in Georgia are easily 150 pounds, pissed all the time, and prone to gore literally anything. We were really lucky we didn't spook them. My time in the army meant I spent a ton of time in the woods of upstate New York. I remember many of nights waking up to things reaching into my pockets, pulling things from my kit, body armor. I'd wake up to a raccoon pillaging my things, literally unzipping pouches and such. I still swear to this day they were organized, rallied behind this giant raccoon duck stick who would sit outside and keep guard and coordinate them. My family went camping every summer when I was growing up. We usually bounced between Virginia Beach, Assateague, and this god-awful place called Westmoreland. One trip we were in Assateague, near the beach, and we had 2 tents set up in different parts of the site. Sometime in the middle of the night my mom woke up, which woke me. She was sitting up straight but completely still, and I looked over at what she was staring at. In the moonlight there was the silhouette of what looked like an old woman looking into our tent. Long wiry hair and everything. I was young, so it terrified me, and I started asking my mom what that was. Who was outside? Once I made noise it spooked the old woman and she took off. And that's when we realized she was actually one of the feral ponies that live on the island. We had set up that particular tent on one of their trails, and they were going down to the beach. Scariest was camping with my wife when a windstorm blew up. I'm talking trees being blown over, branches falling, the works, in a forest full of jack pine. Open bracket. The creepiest was camping with my best friend. We were in a semi-remote camping area. Drivable usually to get to it, but definitely only with a 4x4. It was a semi-maintained camping area, as in there were a couple of fire pits, a few rotten picnic tables, and a rundown outhouse. Parks check this place once a year or so. So we get there and start setting up when Buddy wanders over to the shitter and opens the door. He stands there for a second or two and then closes the door and goes to the second one. Goes in and comes out a few minutes later. He comes back to me and says go check out that first one. I assume someone shit on the floor or an animal got stuck in there and died or something. Nope. 3 full backpacks. And I'm talking big bags. Like the bag I have that size I use for week-long trips. So we are nosy. We open them up. 2 are full of good quality gear, nothing unusual. The third is full of Skittles. Bulk bags. Small bags. Regular. Tropical. Sour. Every flavor and size of bag you can imagine. Just full of ducking Skittles. Camped for 4 days. Never saw a soul. Bag still there when we left. We let the coast know when we got to civilization. Who left all that gear? Why did one person pack 80 liters of Skittles? Don't know. But it was weird. Oh. Another scary one. Dog and I were backpacking. Spur of the moment overnight trip. Wasn't far off the road or anything. So I just have a tarp up as a small shelter. Small little fire. Wasn't really hiding per se, but wasn't being obvious. Just dozing off when I hear a truck rip up and a bunch of drunken voices. Then the shooting started. Now they probably didn't know I was there. I was parked on a different road and hadn't realized I had walked as close as I had to the second one. But I still don't like being in the area when a bunch of drunken yahoos are shooting off guns. Especially when I was fairly certain they were shooting in my direction, based on the lay of the land. So I put Papa on a tight leash and headed out ASAP. Saw a mountain lion looking at me from about 100 feet away while pooping. Good thing I had a gun with me just in case, but it was at my most vulnerable moment. Also it really helped me take a shit faster. 25 years ago or so, saw eyes in the darkness of the trees when shining a flashlight out. Seemed kinda high up. They were red reflecting. Also was having sticks and rocks occasionally thrown into our camp. Nothing big and it was directed at the fire. Eventually it stopped and we went to bed. There was 4 of us. I'm a light sleeper and so is my dad. We both woke up to footsteps and a really bad stink about 5 AM. My dad shook the side of the tent and yelled get the duck out of here, whatever it was, it ran off. Cowlitz country war. Went on a group camping trip in the middle of nowhere Arizona, only to awake and hear something sniffing the outside of our tent. My immediate reaction was that it was likely a bear or some animal that came across our site. And just maybe my dumbest friends didn't tie up the garbage. Seconds later, I can hear the sniffing go to the tent next to us and everyone in mine grabs one another quietly to acknowledge we all were awake and were aware of what's happening outside. Moments later, a friend in another tent popped out and started to scream and make noise. He had a gun too, hoping it would scare off whatever animal was in our sight. Turns out, it wasn't an animal. It was some guy who had gone through our coolers/food and also decided it'd be okay to sniff our tents. Our friend chased him off, and we immediately packed our shit and left. Edit. Alright. Since this is floating at the top, I thought I'd a second creepy camping story. A year after the above incident, my dumbest friends and I went back to the nearby area, thinking what we encountered was a one-time incident. This time, we thought we'd outsmart any possible creepers, and instead of camping in our tents, we all slept in the beds of our trucks and SUVs. Cause you know, They can't possibly sniff a Toyota Tacoma. Anyways, it's the middle of the night. I'm passed out in the back of my SUV when I suddenly feel a bright light on my face. Naturally, I would have woken up, cussed and asked who was doing that. However, I instantly knew to pretend to be asleep and not let the individual know I was awake. I laid there next to my girlfriend, hoping she would do the same as I, and I kept an ear out for any unusual sounds, like sniffing. All I could hear was a friend snoring by the campfire. After the light left my car, I heard the person walk to the next truck and shine his light on my friends in there. I slowly looked up, and it ended up being some older guy, just standing there staring at everyone while they slept. I waited until he left the campsite and I busted my ass out of that truck and woke up my friends, most of which had also been pretending to sleep, and realized what was going on. TL. Doctor, don't camp outside of Tucson, Arizona unless you want a hill-have-eyes creature sniffing and staring at you while you sleep. This reminded me of a story my mom told me. Also in Arizona, my parents were out camping, and my mom got miffed at my dad, so she decided to take a hike by herself. She's walking and down the trail. Is this pissed off looking, bare-ass naked guy just hiking? Had no interest in her or what she was doing. Turns out she was really close to a nudist colony in the area. Edit. This happened in Sabino Canyon in Tucson. How that would have spooked me though. Naked people hiking in the desert? Sounds like the worst possible idea, and leaving oneself open for a lot of dangerous / painful encounters with the nearby surroundings. My dog absolutely lost it on a nice hike. Like, she was scared for her life and would have ran out into the woods had she not been on a leash. Lucky that she didn't pull me over and run away anyway. My mom and I are pretty sure there must have been a mountain lion stalking us, and the dog could smell it. Scary as duck. Because we didn't see anything. And if it had been one of us alone, who knows what would have happened. I was camping, and my family went to bed. I was sitting by the fire drinking beer with my dog. My dog starts growling like crazy. I get a flashlight and start looking around. There was a mountain lion about 100 yards from me. Made me wonder how many times I've been out camping with mountain lions around me. I've never had that experience. Back in the 50s, my dad worked for the Soil Conservation Corps, and he said he came across a still when he was deep in the woods. That was very scary because moonshiners had a reputation for killing government agents. He departed the area hastily. I was out walking around the bush hunting for upland birds. I walked through a bit of a valley as a shortcut to get to another area, when I came across a guy standing on the trail with an AR-15 at the ready position. Instantly the hairs on the back of my neck stood up instinctively, knowing this wasn't a place I wanted to be. Trying my best to stay calm. Hey, just out bird hunting. How are you doing? Apostrophe. Fine. Long pause. I'm hunting deer. Apostrophe. Deer season wasn't open. AR-15s are not legal for deer, and he wasn't dressed for deer hunting. As a matter of fact, he looked homeless. Hadn't changed his clothes, or bathed or shaved in several days obviously, and looked emancipated. Think of the scariest 50-year-old meth addict you can think of, and put an AR-15 in his hands and you're probably close. Do you know the best way for me to go to find some birds? Apostrophe. Well, I imagine you might find some back the way you came. His voice got noticeably sharper with "but the way you came" meant I obviously took the hint. I don't know if there was a meth lab or what just down the trail, but I was certainly happy to leave. I reported the incident to the sheriff the next day, but I don't know that anything ever came of it. Sounds like you handled that situation very well by acting friendly and like nothing was wrong. He probably could have killed you and gotten away with it if he wanted to. I was scared suitless. I asked where I could find some birds, hoping he would take the hint and tell where to go without being shot. I was surprised it happened. Surprised I was calm during it, and surprised nothing happened. I live in a rural town surrounded by mountains and forests, so camping is almost a weekly event, even in winter. The one I can't shake is when me and a friend broke off from our group of other 16 to 19-year-olds to camp by a better fishing spot about a mile away. We only brought one tent for the group, so we built a lean-to against a large boulder in a clearing. I couldn't sleep because I had the feeling something was watching us. I assumed it was a mountain lion, which isn't that big of a deal considering their behavior. So I threw some more logs on the fire. I looked up from the fire, and under the light of a full moon, there was a man standing at the edge of the clearing about 80 yards away. I was frozen and couldn't take my eyes off him while he assumedly stared back. He walked off in the opposite direction. After about a minute or two, I doubt he had any ill intentions, but I sat there holding my friend's 357 the whole night. Edit. I didn't wave or call out because I was terrified. I was frozen since I was 16 and inexperienced. Nowadays, I would call out and see what's going on. Also, mountain lions aren't a concern. I've been stalked by them and have stumbled face to face with a few. They aren't a big issue or fear if you understand them. Jesus, that would have freaked me out. Do not blame ya for keeping the pistol close. On the theme of being watched though, was hiking in the Sierra Nevadas and was getting into camp after sundown. Had a similar feeling of being watched, so I did a slow sweep around me with a flashlight just to check. It's freaky enough to be in a forest at night, but halfway through my scan the light reflected back at me. We had a mountain lion following us. Nearly shit my pants. This isn't really that bad, but here it goes. Girlfriend and I were doing an overpass hike on the North Country Trail, and after hiking some amount of miles, we decided to hang our hammocks and rest. We were hanging about 30 feet off of the trail just snoozing a little when I heard a little noise. I sat up in the hammock a bit and saw that there was a coyote about 10 feet away. We locked eyes and it took off. About the same time, something that sounded a bit bigger took off from the other side of us. We packed up our hammocks and kept going. About 5 minutes down the trail, we came up on a black bear cub and scared it by accident, and it took off. Not exactly camping, but kind of. I lived in a very small town once when I worked from my laptop. Like, population 200 small. I was in a small cabin in the woods, though next to the highway. One day I was walking my dog and heard 2 gunshots somewhere nearby. Didn't think much of it. It's a hunting area and it's kinda redneck like. The next day, or the day after, a truck pulls up. I don't even know anyone in this town, so it's weird, and I'm put off. Guy calls me over, says he's my neighbor, asks if I heard the shots. I said yeah. He claims it was his neighbor taking potshots at his house over a land dispute. Doesn't ask me to be a witness for him or anything, just if I heard. Okay, seems really odd to me. Never met this guy before, and when I say neighbor, I mean 500 meter minus 1 kilometer away out of sight. Guy sees my dog digging somewhere unimportant, and all of a sudden starts trying to tell her not to do that. Gets out and she's iffy of him. Says here watch. Calls her over. Grabs her and tries to do the stupid ducking, says a Chavez dominance. Hold the dog on their back thing. For really no ducking reason. She starts yelping. I'm like, dude, stop. He asks me whether I have any guns myself. I say no. Says he is a great dog trainer. He asks me to go over and mow his lawn. And please ensure to bring your dog. In the strangest way. Just like that. Please ensure you bring my dog's name. I can't describe it, but his mannerisms and the way he talked was just plain creepy. Especially that line. He leaves soon after, and I'm thinking, fuck, I just told this guy not only that I heard the gunshots, but that I'm unarmed here. How do I even know it was his neighbor like he claimed, and not in fact that this weird dude has shot someone at his home and is trying to see who might have heard/witnessed? I wouldn't go to his house. Not a ducking chance. Horrible feeling. Then he kept showing up asking why, calling and texting asking why I gave him my number before realizing how weird he was. Really adamant I'd go over there. Turns out the guy is a total alkie. Lost his wife. Lost his job. Lost everything. Very dangerous mental state. Nothing to lose. The small store owners in town explained the guy to me. He's apparently the most hated guy in the valley. Bad reputation. I'm now really freaked out. I found it very hard to sleep after that. Cabin in the woods. Nobody nearby that would hear any commotion. Ample angles for the place to be approached from the woods and just a can of bear spray and a knife. And the guy knows I have no guns. I would be kept up for hours listening at night for any movement outside, as it was dead silent there. One night, middle of the night, my dog starts to growl, then growls more. I don't hear anything, but it didn't matter. Every room in that cabin had a window but the bathroom. I just got up, grabbed the knife plus bear spray, and locked myself in that ducking bathroom for hours listening. I think I eventually fell asleep in there. I don't think I've ever felt that kind of dread. I just picture this lunatic sneaking up with a shotgun to take me out, for maybe having heard him murder someone with a gun days earlier. Fuck, it was just awful. I moved, but unfortunately the new landlords were equally creepy, and even started trying to steal my dog. Even though they had 3, literally, I heard them discussing it, how they had to make themselves the in crowd so that she'd want to be with them, and hand feeding her dog food when they thought I wasn't looking. Must have just been the small town thing. Totally strange people in that town for the most part. They went to market one morning. I packed all my shit into my uninsured van with no license, and my pup, and ducking bailed that town, and never looked back. Good god. It was hills. Have eyes shitmates. I'm telling ya. Camped in the bottom of a valley with pretty steep rocky walls on either side on a backpacking trip in the Sawtooths in Idaho. In the middle of the night we were all woken up by the sound of a rock slide. Something that happens often in a place like that, I'm sure. Not like a whole mountainside giving way or anything, but at least a few large boulders tumbling down. We could hear them getting closer and closer, smashing through large trees and destroying everything in their path. Thought about running out of my tent, but it was pitch black out, and even if I had a clear view of the rocks I wouldn't be able to see them or where they were going. Decided there were no options with any better odds than just staying in my tent and hoping I picked a lucky spot. We couldn't find any signs in the morning, and the rocks might not have gotten any closer than a quarter mile for all I know, but that feeling of helplessness was pretty disturbing. I used to go backpacking all the time in the mountains and have some good stories, but hands down the scariest things I've ever encountered is lightning. First real experience was at Philmont in New Mexico. Great backpacking area. Lots of fun if you're a scout. Not fun when it storms. My group was eating dinner one night when lightning struck a tree about 50 feet from us. It was unexpected. There were dark clouds, but the sun was shining through still. It just shredded the tree and all of us jumped. Dinner ended up in the dirt. We had a couple other close experiences during those 2 weeks, but that was the closest. Second and most terrifying experience was when we were in Kings Canyon, CA doing the Relax Trail. One of the campsites was by a river. Now, it's prone to rain in the Sierra Nevadas, and we were at the bottom of a tight granite valley that showed some signs of historical flooding. Not my ideal choice of a spot to sleep, but it was a NPS site, and that was the end of our day. At about 2 AM I was awoken by a flash of light so bright I swear I could see the tent through my eyelids. Before I could even think, the thunder roared so loudly though the earth was tearing itself apart. It's hard to accurately describe the sheer power and sound that comes from being right next to a lightning strike. The night didn't end there either. We were directly under the storm and the lightning just kept coming. The thunder never ceased to roll, and the rain was torrential. The lightning was so constant as well. You could almost see through the walls of the tent into the forest around us. It was like daylight out there. I thought I was going to die that night, either from a lightning strike or a flood, if the river rose. Third experience was in Switzerland. We were up in the Alps and got caught in an open field / rocky area during a descent as a storm rolled in. Again, lightning strikes far too close for comfort, and no place to shelter. Just squatting down and praying we wouldn't get struck. Amazing trip, but that moment was not enjoyable. I love watching lightning and rain from inside a cabin or covered porch, but if I'm outside and a storm is coming, I've almost an animalistic fear that screams at me to get indoors. Lightning scares the living shit out of me if I'm not covered. Edit. Spelling. I work as a counselor at a summer camp in Southern California. The place is very out in the woods, so we get all sorts of animals wandering through, from deer and foxes, coyotes howling in the distance, to a mountain lion that's been spotted in the area. The camp also occasionally has a spiritual / haunted vibe. There are a couple creepy and weird spots. Something's in the area that we think show the place has been inhabited in the past. Ghost stories, etc. One night after putting my kids to bed, I was standing outside our cabin talking to another counselor when my friend Sadie comes running by with her entire teenage girls cabin. Maybe 12 of them, all dressed in black and freaking the duck out. She screams at me that she thought they heard a ghost and once her kids were asleep she'd meet me back here to explain and investigate. Sadie is normally the level-headed type not to freak out easily, so this really caught my attention. She meets me back by my cabin maybe 30 minutes later and explains what was going on. She took her campers on a night hike, had them all dress up in black and pretend to be ninjas. All was fun until on their way back they passed a particularly dark part of the trail when they heard off in the distance, just beyond the tree line, what sounded like a faint help from a small child. But each time they heard it, it got more and more distorted until it no longer sounded human. Yet still sounded like a child yelling help in the distance. Naturally they freaked the duck out and ran. Me and Sadie decide to be good counselors and go investigate the sound of a small child yelling help. As we walk over to the area of the trail, we hear it. It didn't sound like a small child anymore. It sounded like a demon screeching out its best impression of a child. And it didn't sound like it was coming from any point source but more was coming from an entire mountainside. We booked it back to the safety of the main part of camp, where we tell this story to anyone who will listen. The next day the camp director had a meeting where they told us to tell our campers not to freak out at the sound of bobcats in the forest. They are harmless, but do make a high-pitched yelping sound at night. Our friends wouldn't let us live that one down all summer. Red foxes can make a sound kinda like a woman screaming. My husband and I got engaged while stargazing in our favorite wildlife area. We decided to take a walk through the park despite how dark it was. About 120 plus feet away, we hear an ethereal scream yelp. So we kinda nervously laugh, knowing it's probably an animal but also wondering if it isn't. We hear a variant of it again. That sounds more animal, but just as far away, and we keep walking a little faster. We hear nothing for like 2 minutes and I joked that was because it was following us. Within 10 seconds of saying that, we heard it again not 15 feet away from us. I've never run that fast in my life. Looked it up on YouTube later after a friend suggested it was probably a fox, and it sounded identical. So now I feel like an idiot. I once had to pee, and a rogue cow that was roaming the woods stared at me dead in the eyes while I was squatting. Was pretty disturbing, and I'm pretty sure it went and told all of its cow friends. I woke up to some cows just staring at me once. Buddy and I had set up our hammocks in the dark, not 100% sure what was actually around us. We woke up to a couple cows right next to our hammocks just staring at us, and a bunch more behind them. We weren't too worried, and as soon as we started actually moving they backed off. But waking up and seeing a cow's face right next to you scared the crap out of me. I think the actual scariest thing I've experienced though was another time when I was alone, and it was a deer. I'd been laying in my hammock just looking up at the treetops when I heard a small noise and saw a huge deer next to me. Now sure, something like a cougar would probably be more dangerous in and of itself, but a deer with big antlers staring at you while you're sort of defenseless in your hammock is not a nice feeling. Especially since I had a tarp and everything set up too, so there was a ton of paracord and stakes all around the site. I was kinda worried that if I spooked him, he might either hurt me with his antlers on purpose or by accident in a panic, or get all tangled in the cords, break my stuff and hurt me. But before I could actually finish that thought, I think he realized WTF he'd stumbled upon and just ducked of like Usain Bolt deeper into the woods. This was not hiking, but it was in a remote place in the woods. My uncle built a house out on some acreage he has that is pretty far out there. There is not another house within 2 miles of his at least, and most of that is woods and cow pastures. But his place is beautiful. He built it all by hand and has a wonderful wraparound deck. Perfect for family get-togethers. We were all out there, probably 20 adults and 5 or 6 kids, for a party one day. It was one of those summer times when it is blazing hot, but the light breeze is cool enough you do not notice it after a while. I had been there hanging out all day when I was asked to run into town and grab some more groceries. So, I packed up and headed out. Got the groceries and everything was fine. As I drove back, it was starting to get dark, and it was at a time of year when dark comes fast. It was pitch black out there when I finally arrived. As I pull up, I noticed something is sitting in front of my car, facing the house. It was not disturbed by my headlights, but it does glance back at me once. It is a ducking panther, just chilling there, watching the party. And as I sit there for a second, watching it, I notice that it has specifically placed itself near the edge where all the kids are running around. After I have my headlights on it for a minute or so, it kind of looked back at me again as if to say, okay, I was caught. Oh well. And then it gave the most human looking sigh and just walked off into the woods. I sat there for a bit before building myself up to getting out of my car and going to the party and telling everyone. Went to Guatemala with my GF. Did a 3-day hike through the jungle to Tikal. Slept in a tent at two tiny ranger campsites deep in the woods. During the second night a massive thunderstorm was coming down above us. At 4 AM I woke up and heard some male voices and left the tent to check them out. 2 guys with rifles approached me. Told my GF to stay in the tent because scary. She didn't comply and joined me. Turns out those guys were local hunters looking for shelter in the camp. Offered them coffee. They were more than happy. About 30 seconds later, the storm got so intense that a biggest tree fell and crashed onto our tent. If I had not left to check out the guys or worse, my GF would have listened. We'd both be very dead now. I was sleeping in the woods, and I woke up in a random house. It turned out to be a family friend's house, and my parents took me there around midnight. When I was a kid around 8 or 9, my mom, grandma, brothers and I went camping at a small camping about 2 hours from the town we lived in. We went there a lot and even had a particular campsite we had slowly built up over the years. On this particular trip we had my aunt and uncle's dogs with us since they were doing military tours. They were both well-trained bird dogs, but usually really calm and friendly. The first night on this particular trip and Star starts growling in the tent at about 1 in the morning. My mom, thinking something is outside, arms herself and investigates with the dogs. As she gets out the tent, Star and Ariel would not let her move to the other edge of the campsite and both get into attack position while herding my mom towards the car. This is while also keeping themselves in front of the tent. By this point we are all up and with a group of kids under 10 freaking out. For a reason she can't even explain today, my mother packs up camp and gets us all into the car to head home. After about 10 minutes out of the campsite, a car starts following us and the dogs get in the back and just growl. By this point everyone was in borderline panic mode and my brothers were crying the entire car ride home. As the town came into view, you have to cross a huge bridge to drive in, and the car was still following us. And as a kid you make stories to yourself that nothing is wrong and the car behind you is just full of scared people too. Yet as we start across the bridge the car stops and just turns around, speeding back the way we came. We stopped at a gas station and everyone was near meltdown mode and my mom goes in to get cigarettes. But Star would not let her back into the car until she could see her clearly. This and a camping trip a few years later convinced me camping is no longer my thing. Once heard all kinds of noises outside our tent. My friend was freaking out, but I told him it was probably nothing. Eventually I heard full-on running feet coming towards the tent. Only when the sound stopped did I realize what was about to happen. Fucker jumped on our tent. We made the mistake of searching for him / them and revealed ourselves. Once they realized we were 3 15-year kids, they were about 18 over 19 and much taller. We were ducked. They spent the rest of the night stalking us on the edge of our vision around the fire, and one of them had a hammer. The 2 of them ended up walking up to us at first light and tried to engage us in conversation whilst wielding said hammer, trying to look for any excuse to use it. To be honest, I wasn't even particularly scared of them. I just found it bizarre that they were willing to stay up until 5 AM with no sleep just to scare some kids. Dawn. Noises outside. Hear a tent trip. About to investigate. Someone starts screaming as I'm about to exit my tent. Grab my walking stick. Get out to see bear pulling backpack out of a tent. Everyone is up now getting outside. I yell hey as loud as I can. Bear looks at me. I start running at him. Bear half stands up, kind of does a double take, then cowers into the bushes. From that point on my friends called me Alpha Bear. These days it's just Bear. Was up hunting. On my way out to my blind before sunup. Kept hearing footsteps behind me on the path that would stop when I did. I would stop every 15 yards or so. How my dad taught me to walk through the woods in the morning to break up the sound a bit, and I would look around trying to see what I was hearing. Skip forward 20 minutes and I make it to my blind. Zip up the door and sit down. Footsteps got super close, so I made a fairly loud noise and I heard it run up the hill behind me and stop. Then I heard a series of different howls. Wolves. I had wolves stalking me at 430 am. Terrifying. So, not me, but my brother took my dog for a walk in the woods one night. We live on a farm in UK and the woods start about 15 meters from our front door. Around 10 PM my brother returned saying has lost the dog. Great. He immediately explained to me that his phone died in the middle of the woods and he had the dog, Chester, right by his side. As he looked down, a circular beam of light surrounded his feet for a split second before it shot off in one direction. The dog was completely gone. So after he hurried back home to get me, I went out into the woods to find him, and about a 20-second walk into the darkness I find Chester behind a big tree. The weirdest part was he did not seem his usual self. He was walking a snail's pace with his tail between his legs. Has ran around these woods on his own at night most of his life with no fear, but this time he was almost trembling. He walked past me into the house and laid down on his bed and that was it. I had a pretty long stint in Boy Scouts, and one time we were camping on a reserve in the Midwestern USA that's normally used in the summer for large sessions, i.e. 1,500 scouts scattered across a large campground. We were camping in October, however, and camp wasn't in session, so it was just our troop of 30 or so guys plus the adult leaders on this massive, empty reserve. Now the summer session has a pseudo-Native American society that serves as a leadership/craftsmanship program. Sort of an extension of Boy Scouts. The Order of the Arrow Link. Org/ would be a similar example. Part of being in the society means crafting a lot of ceremonial outfit type things, so A, you learn how to work with your hands, and B, the ceremonies look pretty cool. Well, it was the last day of our trip, and it had been unusually hot and calm for October. The last thing we do before piling into the cars is a little line. Everyone lines up and we walk the campsite to ensure we leave no trace. We are walking along when one of the guys says, "Hey, I think I found a coup." Apostrophe. Now coup are fairly valuable out there because they're a specially shaped bead that you only get when you join the society. Everyone's coup is unique and it's usually shaped to reflect the person who joined. Whoa man. What kinda coup is it? Apostrophe. Well, it looks like a tornado. Apostrophe. Whoosh. This cold, hard wind came out of nowhere and started pushing the trees and kicking up leaves everywhere. The timing. What in the hell? Hadn't had so much as a breeze for 3 days. We decided our little line was good and got the heck out of there. Society members don't just lose their coup. I wonder what happened. This will get buried, but I have never gone camping or out into the woods at night after this trip. A few friends and I had a long weekend, 5 days, off from school, and we decided to go camping in the North Gam Mountains. We packed a big 10-person tent. There were 5 of us, 2 guys, 3 girls, and loaded up my buddy's truck. He and I had some experience being outdoors/camping/hiking/hunting, and he's an army vet, so we packed really well and had all sorts of amenities like a propane stove/grill, fold-up cots, portable shower. We were in it for the whole weekend. We left Wednesday afternoon and parked the truck in a small town and started hiking into the woods to find a spot. It was a fairly normal hike until we got about 4 to 5 miles in. The first time we noticed something strange was when we came into a little clearing in the woods with a big pond/tiny lake in it. We stepped into the open area and everything stopped. No birds chirping, no squirrels running around. Even the clouds and wind seemed to stop moving. My buddy and I both thought, well shit, there's gotta be a predator nearby, and took out our handguns. It's the law in Kennesaw, just in case. I've never seen a bear in Georgia, so we figured it was a mountain lion or maybe some coyotes. My friend and I were looking around the edge of a clearing and he grabbed me. He nodded across the water, and when I looked I saw what seemed to be a woman standing just at the tree line. She was maybe 150 yards away. We assumed she must live somewhere nearby, and so we continued walking past the water and clearing. As we headed back into the woods, I looked over my shoulder at where she was standing, but she was gone. The sounds of the forest returned once we got into the trees. We made a campsite about 2 miles past that as it was getting late, and we didn't want to be stuck building camp in the dark. We got everything unpacked and set up, and built a fire, popped a couple beers, and sat down to hang out. There was a girl I was interested in on the trip, and we had been flirting, so after a few beers and the sun was down, we snuck away from the fire under the pretense that she wanted help setting up part of the tent. We started fooling around, and after a few minutes she stopped and looked at me funny. I asked what was wrong, and she said nothing. It just got really quiet. We both quickly dressed and headed back outside to the fire. The others hadn't noticed anything strange and didn't mention anything wrong, except joking with us that it took us a long time to fix the tent. On the first morning we found that the propane stove had been turned on but not ignited and had gone empty overnight. None of us had used it. The second morning we noticed some things had gone missing. A lantern we left outside by the fire was gone. My crush's sweatshirt she left on a little folding chair/stool. We figured we just misplaced things or someone had used them and put them somewhere else. During the second full day, Friday, we were looking for a waterfall that we read online was in the area. We were following the river upstream when everything went silent again. My buddy nudged me while we were walking and indicated up to the top of a hill next to the river. I looked up through the trees and was just able to make out the figure of the same woman. Same clothes and all. Just standing. I couldn't tell if she was looking at us or not, but she was just standing there. My buddy told the girls he thought he saw a mountain lion following us and was gonna go scare it off. He hustled up the hill making a lot of noise and came back about 10 minutes later. He said he scared it off to the girls, but told me aside that the woman wasn't there. When he got up there, we found the waterfall and put it out of our minds as the girls decided to skinny dip in the river until it can solve anything. We hiked back to camp and found it a mess. It wasn't totally trashed, but it was clear something had gotten into our stuff. We told the girls it was probably raccoons. We both took our guns to bed with us. That night shit went sideways. I remember waking up because my crush was squeezing my arm. We had been sleeping cuddled up together. I opened my eyes and she hushed me before I could ask what was wrong. There was complete silence all around the tent. I looked across the tent and my buddy was sitting halfway up looking around. We both stayed awake for the next 2 hours until the sun started coming up, and then packed our stuff and we all headed out. The entire hike back into town was eerily silent. There were a couple points I thought I saw the woman through the trees, but never got a clear sight of her. We avoided the lake completely and got back to the truck in what seemed like half the time it took to get out to the camp. After we were safely on the road back home, the girls and my buddy all started to tell everyone about moments they thought they heard/saw the woman all weekend, but were too freaked out to mention it out loud, like she would go away if we ignored her. The wild part was none of us could describe her face. It's almost like it was blurry. No idea who she was, but I've never been camping or hiking at night since. Went camping by myself way out in the middle of nowhere in north central PA. Drove on dirt Forest Service roads for over an hour and then hiked about 6 miles in on a barely recognizable trail. There were no signs anyone had been in the area recently. The trail was almost completely overgrown. No footprints. Spiderweb everywhere, etc. I didn't really have a planned stopping point. I was just looking for a nice place to camp. But the trail followed a creek and a valley and was very rocky and not flat. As the sun is starting to set, I came upon a fork in the creek with a nice flat spot just on the other side. As I got closer, I saw all sorts of stuff laying about. I crossed the creek and started looking around. There was a tarp on the ground by a stone firing. A log about a foot in diameter that had been chopped with an axe. A little bit away I found the entire contents of what you would imagine to find in a hiker's backpack. Food, cooking set, camping pad, first aid kit, etc. all strewn about on the ground, but no backpack in sight. There was a pile of clothes down by the creek that looked like it had sat through the last rain, which was the day prior, and a towel hanging from a tree. There was an area that had clearly been used as a toilet for maybe 10 to 14 days, based on the amount of toilet paper piles. The strangest thing though, was this cage about 4 square, made out of saplings tied together. It was framed where the edges of a cube would be, and then had crossbars diagonally on each face. But it wouldn't have kept anything inside, because of how much open space there was, and obviously wouldn't have been very sturdy, since it was only made from saplings. I ended up deciding to set up camp there, because it was nearly dark, and I didn't really have much choice, unless I wanted to hike out in the dark on an unrecognizable trail. I had a 12-foot knife on me, and I kept that thing in one hand the whole time I was there, thinking some crazy guy was gonna jump out and try to eat me. All night I barely slept and kept thinking I was hearing things. And then as soon as the sun came up I packed up and got the duck out of there. Everything turned out fine. No crazy cannibals or anything. But it still really bugs me because I don't know what that stupid wooden cube frame cage thing was. I called the Forest Service for the area and told them about it. Even sent them pictures. They said they'd send a ranger in to check it out and clean it up. But I never followed up to see if they figured out what it was. The ranger on the phone told me it was probably either someone with a still nearby, someone growing pot, or just some loner living out in the woods. I roamed up the sides of the valley before I set up camp and didn't see anything. It still seems unlikely because of how far you would have to carry equipment in. And the area isn't really great for growing pot. So maybe it was just some guy living out in the woods. But why the cage? Question mark? Question mark? If there's any interest I can probably find the pictures. Oh yeah, and last year I was camping out in Colorado and woke up at about 2 AM to a pack of coyotes running through my camp howling. Sounded like at least 20 of them. My dog was asleep next to me the entire time. Probably best he didn't wake up though. He would have gone nuts. And I'm told coyotes are much bolder in packs. Edit. Found the pics. Link. com/gallery/06boy. More disgusting than anything. Went to Shenandoah Park in Virginia with a college buddy. JMU is super close, so he and I took some camping gear from work and headed up there to catch that Perseid meteor shower. Hiked a good ways in on an out and back trail that ended with a clough overlooking the Blue Ridge MTNS, and was awestruck. I set up my 2-person tent and he rigged his hammock with a tarp a few yards back, and then we sat on a cliff and watched the stars go by. Here's where life got real for me. We go to bed pretty early that night, and around what I could only guess was 3 AM I start hearing tapping sounds all around my tiny tent. Now I knew it wasn't rain or him playing a joke on me, so I started to panic a little. At this point I've been fully awake/alert for 10 minutes and can still easily hear this tapping. I finally grow a pair and decided turn on my flashlight, and what do I see when looking straight up through the mesh top of this tent? Question mark? Hundreds and hundreds of centipedes. They were falling like a gentle drizzle all around my tent and I felt like I was on an episode of Fear Factor. Long story short, I didn't sleep that night, obviously, but my buddy who was about 15 feet away was out like a rock. In the morning there were dead centipedes everywhere. I'm normally fine with bugs/insects but not swarms. Don't know how we didn't see any sentient carcasses a day before or when setting up camp. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.